Hi, and welcome to Real Ideals, a show where we bring the community together to talk about our idealistic life and how to make that a reality. Today, we're talking about education. So I'm talking to people in the community about education from all different levels, K through 12, as well as college. Today with me, I have Marty Otanez. He is a CU professor in anthropology and also a documentary filmmaker. Thank you, Marty, for joining us.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
Roshan Bliss, he is a student organizer for a group called Popular Resistance, as well as other organizations for educational reform. Hello.
Hi.
Dedrick Sims, he is the CEO and founder of Sims Fayola International School, a school in the Denver area, a private charter school for all males.
Hello.
Thanks for coming.
Absolutely.
And Chelsea Snyder, who is a Teach for America educator. Hello. So the purpose of this show is to bring educators together to kind of settle our values that we have in education so we can achieve progress. So the basic question I have for everybody today is to ask themselves what are the basic values that we have in education. So what is somebody who goes through the education, let's just say public education at this point, let's just say in general education, a child who goes through education in the United States, what are our most basic hopes that we hope that they walk away with? So I'll start with you, Marty.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Diana. I think this is a great topic and hopefully maybe the first of many discussions. I think in general, the way I like to kind of get this started is to think about learners and teachers. In the classroom, and I'm going to be speaking mostly at the university level, you know, for me, I think a value is getting individuals to come out and be compassionate, informed learners and students. I'm a learner, constantly educating myself about new strategies to teaching, new theories, new methodologies to understand culture and to change culture and to rethink culture. But the other thing I really think that's valuable is I'm also a student, continuously educating myself. And so I like to work with students to prepare them so when they go outside the university, they can practice good citizenry by being compassionate learners and teachers and using themselves as role models so others can follow their lead.
That's important. I feel like a lot of people do forget and stop being students and just start dictating. And then that's kind of when we have this clash between students and professors. So that's a good point. What about you, Roshan? What are some of the values you feel that people need to walk away with in their younger education?
I think that for us to really have an education system that's serving the needs of society, we need people to walk away with a few different things. People need to come out of our schools being critically literate, not just literates. They need to be able, there's a great Paulo Freire quote. Paulo Freire is a very influential educational philosopher, and he says that we need to be able to not only just read the word, but be able to read the world. We need people who understand not only what the three branches of government are and how they work, but really be able to understand what is happening in society and who is gaining, who's losing, and really have that critical literacy be turned into skills for democracy. We need an education system that is going to prepare people to be critical citizens, to be good citizens who will advance our society in directions that it needs to go. And that's why the last thing that people need to leave with public education, and something that needs to be the point of education, is that education needs to empower people, it needs to liberate people. The way that our schools and our education system works should be for the purpose of helping all of our human society achieve its full potential. That's certainly not what we're seeing it happen, or seeing it do right now, though.
Yeah, I would definitely have to agree. I think leaving understanding understanding how you learn, right? How you access information, how to be resourceful, right? And how to look at this world with a very critical eye. knowing how to access the resources, but using those resources based on the way you're critiquing the world. I think that's important. I don't think just walking out of the door and just having this set of skills from K-12, but those skills need to be transferable to higher education, but also just to life. So it's not that these isolated facts, but how do I apply what I've learned in the classroom or in that K-12 setting, whether that's, those are abstract concepts, or whether those something that's very tangible. You need to be able to apply those things to your life and look at your world very critically.
How about you, Chelsea?
Yeah, I would agree definitely with the critical thinking element. I think, like, as an educator myself in an elementary school classroom, that's something I really push with my kids is, like, don't just solve the problem the way that I want you to solve it, but, like, think about how you're going to solve it. And I think taking that from a micro example to, like, being able to apply that to your everyday life and to your interactions in the community. I see a problem, how can I solve it? So I think the critical thinking component is really important, and then also having this kind of ownership of your education and taking it to the community and taking it to the world. And now that you've been given these tools, what can you do to change the world around you and to engage with the world around you?
So that leads into, you guys kind of touched on it a little bit, but if you guys want to speak to the specific projects that you're working on that really put all of these values into motion. Marty, do you want to start?
Yeah, so one of the projects I'm working on, there's a high school called Florence Crittenden in West Denver, and it's a high school of pregnant and parenting teens. And so I'm at the preliminary stages of doing a digital storytelling workshop with a group of young women ages 14 to 21 to provide them with a platform to tell their stories about educational access or lack of access. And then with these little 2-minute digital stories, which are basically first-person videos that are stories about a person themselves as opposed to talking about someone else. So these stories in a video format will be shared with people at the City College and State University level, and then the University of Colorado level, and any other colleges that want to be educated on how to create a pipeline for individuals primarily from marginalized communities so that they can access higher levels of education. It seems like 100% I'm behind critical literacy, but I think we have a huge problem of a lack of access. And I think the access issue in terms of reducing barriers or at least providing testimonials or individual stories as part of a larger strategy to educate decision makers to increase access for individuals who currently have a lack of or non-existent access.
Dedrick, why don't you tell me about some of the projects that you guys, and tell me about your school a
Yeah,
little bit more.
so Sims Fayola, we're Denver's first all-boys public charter school, grades 6 through 12. We opened the school last year with grades 6 and 9, and we're building 2 grades at a time. So this year we have 6, 7, 9, and 10, and eventually we'll be 6 through 12. What makes us really different is that we're not only focused on getting our young men ready for college. I think charter schools in general are kind of doing that work. But also for global competence and global competitiveness. So our young men are required to graduate bilingual, so they take 4 years of a foreign language. They actually take a trip to another country the summer of their junior year as a capstone project. In the 9th and 10th grade, they work with students from other countries through video conferencing and Skype on international projects. So right now we're doing some work with Bangalore, India around place talks and water place. We're also doing some work with Uganda and also Ghana. So every cohort, every classroom is named after a country as well. And so, instead of saying, Miss Jones' class or naming it after a university like Harvard, right, we'll say China, Argentina. And so they identify themselves, with that country. And throughout the year, they learn about that country during advisory. And when they earn rewards in the currency of that country. And when the store comes around on Friday, they have to convert the naira, if they're in Nigeria, or the yen, they have to convert it to the US dollar to figure out what they can buy. Mm-hmm. So that level of in-depth exposure to other countries is something that we're really proud of, and making sure our students are not only competing against Mr. Smith sitting next to them, but also Mr. Smith across the pond as well. The great thing about it is that we have an 80% free and reduced population. We're not private, actually.
Okay.
We're public.
Oh, you're public.
Yeah, absolutely. We're public. I felt like that this kind of educational experience should not be reserved for those who can just pay for it. Yeah, again, it's about access, and equality for that matter. We have about 45% Latino, 45% African American. Then there's 10% of other nationalities there. So we feel really good about the work that we're doing. I think our biggest project is exposing young men who normally wouldn't get this kind of access through a learning environment that's tailored strictly for them. We have big hallways, we have basketball goals in the classrooms, we have single gender learning instructions. Teachers are not speaking for 45 and 50 minutes in front of boys who have 5 to 7 minute attention spans. There's a lot of movement in project-based learning. And so that, when I talked earlier about learning how you access information, when boys, can say, look, I access information and interact with information through this spatial way, this kinesthetic and hands-on way, then it allows them to show their genius, right? Through ways that they know how to do it. And it actually empowers them to say, I can go on to college, or I can do something more because I understand the way I learn and I've been able to show mastery in it.
And so, I mean, if you could just, I kind of need this too, is kind of brush up on how a charter school gets formed and how it works. Yeah.
A lot of hard work. So charter schools are independent charter schools that's usually chartered through a public district or a state. In our case, we're chartered through Denver Public Schools, which means that I wrote an 800-page charter and got a lot of support from the community. I had to form my own board. So we have our own board. I had to form our own board. And we went to Denver Public Schools and said, this is the model that I want to do. Basically, do you approve of it, or can you allow us to operate? And we did. We got a unanimous approval back in 2011, and here we are. So we are free of a lot of the statutory requirements for traditional public schools. In terms of hiring, there's a little wiggle room in some states for people being certified or not being certified. We fundraise a lot in order to get our programming the way we want it to be. We recruit kids, so it's not like it's zoned to where kids just show up. So we're actually going out and recruiting kids. We can hire and fire at will. We're at will. So we don't have to document a bad teacher or a teacher who's not good for kids over 2 or 3 years, right? If they're damaging kids in the classroom on Monday, theoretically they can be gone on Tuesday, right? And so that way you control the quality of instruction that's happening in classes.
And I just want to talk to you guys because you're more involved in public schools. And did you go to a public school, Roshan?
I did, yeah.
I mean, what's your opinion about, charter schools and kind of having that freedom? I mean, that's a huge jump, right, between public schools where they're going on this line, this is what we have to do no matter what. It sounds great.
Yeah, no, I think the charter school debate has taken this kind of heated tone, and there's a lot of real reasons for that. I think things like Sims Fayola are doing really amazing work, and that if all charter schools were like Sims Fayola, we would be seeing a way different discussion in the charter school debate. But in lots of ways, one of the biggest issues is that Sims Fayola is a public charter school, and you get a lot of private schools who are basically being started up by and funded by people who already have money and being used in lots of ways to just increase that money, to grow. There are people making money off of education in lots of ways through charter schools. And in lots of places where charter schools are popping up, you see them popping up to replace closed public schools. And that is seeing this trend start where lots of charter schools, because they have the increased selectivity of who they can take, they don't have to take as many people from the community, be they learning challenged, if they have disabilities, if they need free and reduced lunch, if they can't afford tuition. You see public schools who had to accept all kinds of students being closed and replaced with private charter schools that are basically allowed to keep out the people that they don't want to teach, and then they're competing for public money, even though they're private schools. So I think that there's a lot of issues with charter schools, and it would be such a better thing if we had public schools that basically had the same kind of flexibility, freedom, and resources that we see a lot of the private and public charter schools getting. Just in the standard public education system, we wouldn't even need charter schools anymore.
Just really quickly before we break, we're going to go to a video What do you think is holding some of this stuff back? I mean, doing some of the practices that they have at the charter school, maybe at the high school, or maybe just some of the underlying factors why there are so many pregnant teenagers at that high school and among so many other things.
Yeah, I would, well, first of all, I want to congratulate the work you're doing. I think for me, I'm learning about it, and tonight, it sort of reinforced how what you're doing, it's so innovative and needed, especially when we think about how the world, everywhere we turn, there's this global dimension and kids need that exposure. I think one of the problems is how do we scale it up? And I think listening to you and the success that you've had and the direction you're going, it's sort of another indication about how our public school system is just failing. And I think specifically it's a problem of resources. And it's a problem not just in Denver or Colorado, but across the country on how whenever there's any kind of budget cut, education or social services tends to be cut first. And so I would love over time to sort of educate myself by talking with you and others, what could be done to, free up resources so that a family who lives in a neighborhood where there is a public school, that they can go there and get the education that you offer without having to maybe go across town to go to a specific charter school. And I'm relatively new to the charter school debate. I do recognize that there's advantages to it. And again, I think it's a symptom of what's wrong with the educational system. I'm a little concerned with, for example, the lack of job security for teachers, because as an individual who's strongly in support of workers' rights and trade unions, the idea that you can just fire someone for a slippage, that raises some concerns with me, and I still feel I need to educate myself more about that in terms of, what could be done. What is the role of a union, for example? What is the role of the administration to sort of work through some of these job place issues?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it seems like there's a lot of picking and choosing with some of the private. I mean, I would kind of want to call it private, although it's not, but also a lot of room you can't move in public too.
Mm-hmm. Can I respond just for a second?
Yeah.
Quick? So, I agree with you. I think that job security is definitely important. I think the beautiful thing about the charter movement is that we have the ability to remove ineffective teachers or ineffective staff. I think one of the things that have held traditional schools back is that you do have teachers who sometimes retire on the job, and you have the example of the rubber room in New York and those kind of things where once a teacher gets tenure, then they kind of just stop teaching kids sometimes, right? It's not blanket, it's not across the board. But then the principal has to go through this years of paperwork to get rid of a teacher that's not really being effective in the class for kids. The charter school is, it's sort of like we're at will, like businesses, right? If you're not doing your job on your business, you can, we do have paperwork, and a great leader would definitely coach and try to get the teacher where they need to be. But at the end of the day, that if you have to make a decision that's best for kids, then you have the ability to do so. But I agree with you. I don't think that we should just be firing people at will. Mm-hmm.
All right, we're going to go to a video of a lecturer and I guess professor of education. His name is Ken Robinson. Works for an organization called RSA. So let's go to that video, and also an interview with Jackson, who is a young student.
Every country on earth at the moment is reforming public education. There are two reasons for it. The first of them is economic. People are trying to work out how do we educate our children to take their place in the economies of the 21st century. How do we do that? Given that we can't anticipate what the economy will look like at the end of next week, as the recent turmoil is demonstrating. How do we do that? The second, though, is cultural. Every country on earth is trying to figure out how do we educate our children so they have a sense of cultural identity and so that we can pass on the cultural genes of our communities while being part of the process of globalization. How do we square that circle? The problem is they're trying to meet the future by doing what they did in the past. And on the way, they're alienating millions of kids who don't see any purpose in going to school. When we went to school, we were kept there with a story, which is if you worked hard and did well and got a college degree, you would have a job. Our kids don't believe that. And they're right not to, by the way. You're better having a degree than not, but it's not a guarantee anymore. And particularly not if the route to it marginalizes most of the things that you think are important about yourself. And people say we have to raise standards as if this is a breakthrough. You know, like, really, yes, we should. Why would you lower them? You know, I mean, I haven't come across an argument that persuades me of lowering them. But raising them, of course we should raise them. The problem is that the current system of education was designed and conceived and structured for a different age. It was conceived in the intellectual culture of the Enlightenment and in the economic circumstances of the Industrial Revolution. Before the middle of the 19th century, there were no systems of public education. Not really. I mean, you could get educated by Jesuits, you know, if you had the money. But public education, paid for from taxation, compulsory to everybody and free at the point of delivery, that was a revolutionary idea. And many people objected to it. They said it's not possible for many street kids, working class children, to benefit from public education. They're incapable of learning to read and write, and why are we spending time on this? So there's also built into it a whole series of assumptions about social structure and capacity. It was driven by an economic imperative of the time, but running right through it was an intellectual model of the mind, which was essentially the Enlightenment view of intelligence. That real intelligence consists in the capacity for a certain type of deductive reasoning and a knowledge of the classics originally, what we come to think of as academic ability. And this is deep in the gene pool of public education, that there are really two types of people, academic and non-academic, smart people and non-smart people. And the consequence of that is that many brilliant people think they're not, because they've been judged against this particular view of the mind. So we have twin pillars, economic and intellectual. And my view is that this model has caused chaos in many people's lives. It's been great for some. There have been people who have benefited wonderfully from it. But most people have not. Instead, they suffer this. This is the modern epidemic, and it's as misplaced and it's as fictitious. This is the plague of ADHD. Now, this is a map of the incidence of ADHD in America, or prescriptions for ADHD. Don't mistake me here. I don't mean to say there is no such thing as attention deficit disorder. I'm not qualified to say if there is such a thing. I know that a great majority of psychologists and paediatricians think there is such a thing. But it's still a matter of debate. What I do know for a fact is it's not an epidemic. These kids are being medicated as routinely as we had our tonsils taken out. And on the same whimsical basis, and for the same reason, medical fashion. Our children are living in the most intensely stimulating period in the history of the earth. They're being besieged with information and calls for their attention from every platform, computers, from iPhones, from advertising holdings, from hundreds of television channels. And we're penalizing them now for getting distracted. From what? You know, boring stuff at school, for the most part. It seems to me it's not a coincidence totally that the incidence of ADHD has risen in parallel with the growth of standardized testing. Now, these kids are being given Ritalin and Adderall and all manner of things, often quite dangerous drugs, to get them focused and calm them down. But according to this, attention deficit disorder increases as you travel east across the country. People start losing interest in Oklahoma. They can hardly think straight in Arkansas. And by the time they get to Washington, they've lost it completely. And there are separate reasons for that, I believe. It's a fictitious epidemic. If you think of it, the arts...
Just a random cut.
So we're actually going to continue with a student interview that I did with a student here at Denver Open Media. He goes to a school called Denver High Tech High School, and which is in the Montbello area. So let's go to Jackson's interview.
Jackson Hossman. I live up in Northglenn with my mom and down in Aurora with my dad. I go to a school called High Tech Early College, and I'm 17 years old. It's a high school that is supposed to help bring kids into the 21st century by using more technology than books. I personally want to go into science fields, like earth science study and biology. I'm not too sure about chemistry or physics, but earth science and biology just sort of seem to make sense to me. I think somebody who's interested in it like I am to help teach me and give me resources and just help sort of make sure I stay on track. The schools that I've gone to never required study, you know, like high schools would typically have you go home and do, you know, 1 to 2 to 3 hours of homework a night, and middle schools would start by doing that in class, and I never really was challenged in the sense that I had to study something for long periods of time. As for organization, I just never was put into a situation where I had to be very organized. You know, as long as I could find out where it was, I was happy. I didn't really care if it was organized or whatnot. I think studying is getting pulled back from schools a lot because of technology. I mean, technology is coming into our lives and it's advancing us, but in the same time, it's sort of pulling us back from being so advanced because it's taking away some critical skills that we don't think are very critical, but in truth they are. I mean, I think somebody could argue that a person who's been taught all these abilities, like studying or critical thinking or analyzing something, but has not been introduced to 21st century education might be smarter than somebody who was educated in the 21st century because, you know, they know how to do all this other stuff. They know how to open a book and properly study it rather than somebody who would just, I don't need to open it, I got it right here on Google. You know, I think there could be an argument made for that.
Welcome back to Real Ideals. We're talking about education today. So that was Jackson. He's a student at Denver High Tech High School. And so he had a lot of concerns. He said that he wasn't studying, doesn't know how to study, doesn't know how to open a book and properly define things for himself. He just goes online and Googles definitions. You know, I do remember kind of having to figure things out from a large textbook. You know, there were definitions in there, but I had to go back and forth. And of course, I'm not that much older than him. I'm only like, 10 years older than him, but I didn't have Google. Mm-hmm. So what do you guys think about that? What do you think about having a computer in the classroom, and how do you manage that kind of thing?
I think, like, at least from my experience in the classroom, I saw technology like way overused in some cases and then underused in other cases. There was one program that we used in math that was incredible for building critical thinking skills with students. But then there were so many other programs where money was allocated to like smart boards and things that were just kind of fun, but weren't really driving instruction. And I guess my personal issue and debate is like, why don't we put that money towards recruiting and training teachers so we have smaller class sizes and they're able to give more individualized instruction, and they're not computers, they know these kids and they've seen them perform. And so I guess that's my issue, my main issue with technology.
In lots of ways I see the linkage between both of those clips, where you see people like Jackson who feel disengaged and who are obviously really intelligent, bright kids, but the content and the sort of delivery and the menialness of their actual, the process of their education has gotten so out of date and so out of whack with what the current sort of setting that young people grow up in is. It's so radically different from when the kinds and styles of teaching that we still see in lots of ways embodied in our schools were developed. there's a lot of issues in the disconnect. But I think that it's also because in lots of ways people like Jackson aren't allowed to drive their own education in most settings. You have some really unique schools where children and young people do actually drive their own education, but for the most part, they're handed something that they have to learn, whether they want to or not, whether they're interested in it or not. And even despite the fact that there might be something over here that's not on the class board, that's not in the curriculum, that's not on the chalkboard every day, but that they are really passionate about and they already know a lot about and they've already educated themselves about, we're not using the energy and the creativity and passion of young people in the schools enough. Because we're driven by these standardized tests and these sort of pushes to control and mandate the curriculum by essentially the federal government and private industry.
And so let's just get some more opinions on standardization and increased standardization. Anybody else have some opinions about that?
I think testing is good. Like I think there needs to be a point in any process, whether it's an education process or building a widget, to where there are checkpoints to where you can see whether or not you're moving in the right direction. Mm-hmm. But I think that the issue is how are we using these standardized tests and what are we trying to infer about kids based on these assessments? We have assessments every 6 weeks, right? Interim assessments every 6 weeks, and we use those to see whether or not kids are moving and growing in the right direction. We take that data and then we, have this reteach week to where we kind of restructure what the kids didn't quite get that were like power standards, and then we would reteach them for a week and then we move on to something different. But it's solely a checkpoint where we're dipsticking a bit to see whether or not kids are moving in the right direction. We're not making any assumptions about their abilities to learn with any of that. It's mainly for us to see where they are. And I just think that standardized tests have they're pointing in the wrong direction. They're used to be critical of schools. For example, this is a fear that I have, right? Is that we have innovative charter schools like ours, right? Who our model is outside of, say, some of the bigger charter school networks, and the fear is that funders are using standardized test scores to push funds towards these big models that replicate, but there's no innovation, right? Mm-hmm. So for schools like ours that are different than the bigger models, we don't have the story that they have, and it's not cookie cutter. We're different, and so we struggle to get the funding because, we're not the Walmart brand over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. Charters were meant to be, were meant to allow innovation, right? And I fear that is going to be threatened by that, but standardized test scores are definitely a part of that. What we teach at Sims Fayola, the value that we have for young men, is not measured on the standardized test score.
Can't be.
It's not measured, and it won't ever be measured, right? What the test scores do is that they force you to teach this 1-2-1-2 rote memorization, drill and kill style, and not, hey, I see something over there that really interests me, right? And so I'm going to engage in that, and I have the ability I'm going to learn how to think critically about it and be resourceful about it and how to take things apart and put it back together and actually learn, right? Those things are not being measured by standardized tests.
Well, what about things just such as math? Is there debate on that? On whether or not, it's not creative enough and,
Yeah, I think coming from, I just moved up from Las Vegas, so I'm much more familiar with what's going on in education there. But I know they're moving towards more performance assessments, so it's less of can you check the right box or guess the right answer, and more of here's a situation, how would you solve this problem? And they look at how kids are solving problems and how they're piecing things together, and so they kind of are analyzing more of the critical engagement and not just whether or not you can get the answer right. So I think like you said, I think that standardized tests are important. I think the problem is the content of the test and what they're testing. Are they testing can you answer a question, or are they testing can you produce something, can you engage in something?
Yeah, and I've heard some scary things about the people who make the tests, actually. They're just giant corporations like Verizon or something that contribute to making a test. I mean, I'm not Pearson is the,
Pearson,
you know.
yeah.
But I mean, who is Pearson? I mean, it's an educational company, private corporation that delivers these tests for billions of dollars. You know, who gets a say in that?
Not the teachers, and not the students, and not the parents, not the community. It's people at Pearson. And you know, that's one of the biggest issues that we're seeing right now in education is that you see a lot of the major, most central important things that we're changing in our schools being driven by not teachers, not students or parents or people who are involved, but business leaders, people who are technology experts and who have a vested interest in the growth of the use of these standardized tests, the technology by which they're administered, all of the programs, you know, somebody's got to grade the test, somebody's got to print and distribute the test, all these different things. And I think that that is one of the central fears that I have about the future of education is that we will continue to see education more and more driven by industry, by the economy, and not by the needs of society, not by the needs of our democracy, not by a desire to certainly have people engage critically in a democracy, or you know, even be able and competent to be good actors in their community. You're going to continue to see that. My fear is that we're going to continue to see the influence of business and money driving where we're taking our children and our future, and by the standards, by what we've seen in the last 20 and 30 years, the way that industry and businesses and large corporations like Pearson have driven our society, that's not taking us in a good place at all.
So Jackson, when I think back about what he said in the video, it seems to me we have individuals like him, very smart, having some frustrations. It seems to me rethinking the standardized testing, how they're funded, the role of businesses. What can we do to identify leaders such as Jackson and others so they can participate in maybe rethinking what we're doing in education so it's not just adults or individuals that have drifted away from the educational system. So when I think of Jackson and when I think of what he shared with us, can we have student-driven policies that they educate us about their particular needs, their interests, their visions for the future with education, and then collaborate with them to force political will so people in the community, people, families, students like Jackson, educators at higher levels to come together and actually dismantle the current system of standardization and then rebuild it in a way that's compatible with students' interests and that meet the expectations of Jackson. I do want to mention, I'm a lover of technology, and I think when I heard his position, I think the key issue is just balance. Technology is good. When I leave here, I will have conversations with people around the world through social media for different research projects that I'm involved in. And so I look at social media, I look at technology as a tool, a resource for building solidarity with my alliances in Denver as well as around the world. I think the problem with technology in the classroom is some of us as educators don't necessarily have the right skills to administer the technology in a way that meets the interests of people like Jackson.
Just going back to, kind of your ideal situation where we're collaborating and we're instituting our own values in education. How do we do that? Have you seen any signs of that? Or is it just a top-down?
Yeah, I think my school is probably the best example in that, Sims Fayola came from my ideals of what an educational experience should be like for boys. And giving opportunities to boys who normally wouldn't have access to the learning experiences that we're trying to create. I think that's one of the beautiful things about charter schools is that there is room for this innovation. There is room for a tailored program. And I must say that I think the traditional public school is recognizing some of that because a lot of the practices that we have in charter schools, for like longer days or more autonomy with the principal to hire and fire and make decisions around budgets and really align your monies with what your program is. Some districts are experimenting with that, and they're allowing it to happen. So they do see some value in it. The problem is that the advantage is we have less layers to go through than a traditional public school. You have the principal, then you have the district level, and then you have the superintendent, and then you have there's so many layers to go through to make a decision about Johnny who's sitting right there who needs something right then. With the charter schools, we're able to be flexible and kind of move. I kind of equate us to the traditional public school system being an 18-wheel and we're a Porsche, right? So we can move a lot quicker, turn a corner a lot quicker when we need to. Absolutely.
Yeah, I feel like the charter school phenomenon is just grown so much. I mean, do you guys see kind of where that's going? Do you see a lot more charter schools popping up and people kind of flocking to them? What do you think will happen to kind of our institutions as that continues?
I think the public education is going to continue to get weaker. The growth of charter schools, especially private charter schools, it threatens to sort of choke out traditional public schools. And I completely agree that we need to, turn our, maybe not have all of our traditional public schools be Porsches, but there's definitely lots of ways that they need to be given extra flexibility, and they need to be able, the promise of the charter movement for years has always been that we're going to give charter schools this extra flexibility to that the traditional public schools don't have, and then we're going to we're going to return those lessons and the innovation and the flexibility that charter schools got. We're going to return those new lessons and those new ways of doing things to public schools. The problem is that's not happening. And what we're doing is we're seeing traditional public schools just basically get phased out. And I think that the continued growth of the charter school movements in ways that it shows new things that we can do that are possible, like with Sims Fayola, those will continue to give us good things, but if those never make their ways back into traditional public schools, the charter school movement is not really doing, the public school administration is not really doing what it promised to by opening up charters possibilities. In terms of how we change our institutions and how we get there, I think that step number one has to be to fire Arne Duncan, the Secretary of Education. He is at the helm of and completely roll back, race to the top, the policy that he and President Obama have pushed over the Obama administrations that was really just no child left behind on steroids in lots of ways. And the answer to start reforming our institutions is to really open up ways where the teachers themselves, the educators who are at the ground level with the young people and the students of our schools and our societies, along with their parents, and along with those students themselves, can start to engage in a real process that is going to, like Marty said, bring the things that they already know about what works and what doesn't work to bear into their own schools, and keep that at a local level, keep that at a state level at the maximum. We don't have to have a large federal, way to standardize the entire country's education. There need to be guidelines, there need to be, some basic infrastructure. But in lots of ways, I think that we need to relocalize the control of our schools and devolve that a lot of those decisions to the local administration, the local teachers, the students, and the parents themselves. That's really what I think we need to be seeing in the way that our public institutions change. It's not what we're seeing.
Building off of your point, and I'm in support of finding a new leader. I think as that happens, we need to denormalize this model that we run education like a business. The key issue there, and again, I'm going to speak from my perspective as a professor in the University of Colorado, Denver. Increasingly, we're finding the corporatization of institutions of higher learning. And so what that means, two things. Faculty, staff, and students are sort of beholden to those individuals that fund the university. For example, the oil and gas, fracking, these areas in Colorado tend to, spend a lot of money at the university and thereby sort of, in a way, indirectly dictate what is administered at the classroom level. And what you find administered is this idea that you should all come out as company men, and you should come out as good capitalists, and you should come out as non-critical, literate citizens. And so I think rethinking this model or pushing this denormalization of the business model to run education is something we need to do simultaneously as finding new leaders at the federal level and state level.
Yeah, I've seen, I mean, we went to University of Denver, and there's a lot of corporatization of the university of itself, of just the brand that it puts out there, and then also the corporations that are the funders of the actual programs. And I find that an endless and somewhat hopeless place to be.
It's not hopeless. There's lots of ways that. So you're absolutely right. That's not just a trend at that specific university. It's everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere, and especially in sectors of research and teaching that are really kind of closely connected to or useful to large industries. You've got universities all over the Midwest who are funded, who take lots and lots of money from big agriculture groups like Monsanto, and pharmacy having way too much influence in the way that pharmacy schools work. There's all kinds of connections there where higher ed has been turned into kind of an appendage of the capitalist economy rather than its own institution for the public good. But I don't think that it's hopeless because I think that in lots of ways we're seeing more and more faculty and students who are seeing these things and realizing that they, in lots of ways, have the power and the influence in the university, that they are definitely controlled by the administration, by ways that things work, but they have a lot of influence that they can exercise to challenge the decisions that the universities are making. You're seeing a huge divestment movement both in terms of the fossil fuel movement and also in terms of the boycott, divest, and sanction movements that's fighting for justice for the Palestinian people. And in lots of ways, you're seeing students and faculty bringing their own leverage to bear on the financial decisions that their universities make. And that's a really key sort of motion to keep in mind when we think about how universities can change. It's not that there's this completely one-sided motion toward corporatizing it, though that side has a lot more momentum and energy and resources. There is another side that can push back, and is.
Well, we're going to transition into college for our last segment. So we have one interview with a girl named Allie. She is a aspiring radio journalist, and she works here in the station at KGNU. So we're listening to her story first, and then we're going to have a fun little skit that we made with a girl named Brittany, who's also a film student and kind of in the same deal with trying to transition from college to work and having some troubles there. So watch those two videos.
My name is Allie Shirotis. I graduated with a degree in broadcast journalism in December. And I would like to be a independent producer for either public or community radio. Well, talking about radio specifically, I think it's important to create opportunities for other people passionate about radio. I've noticed that people are very supportive of me as a kind of blossoming radio producer because they want radio to stick around and they want more people, young people, to come up into the industry and be passionate about it. So, if I reach out to someone who I admire at Colorado Public Radio or at KUNC or a producer at any station in the country, I've noticed I always get a response back, and they're always really eager to help me out and to offer up connections, and that's really heartening. So sometimes it feels a little bit inaccessible to strive for these unpaid internships in New York. I can't afford to move to Brooklyn to to work 40 hours a week getting unpaid, So, but I'm finding that isn't the only direction, and that there really isn't kind of that glass ceiling for me, and there's a lot of other little stations or other people who can help pull me up, and then one day I will be able to hopefully get to that dream spot, or I'll make my own show, I'll have my own podcast, and I'll take my own alternative route.
Goldfish? Brittany? I know who you are.
From his position.
Mr. Wiener Schnitzel needs to do your credits. I can't do them. I told you.
I can see the whole place.
Mr. Wiener Schnitzel does your credits. He is the one that has to transfer credits over.
But he sent me over here to
From this my position, I make some stand. I make my peace with them. And it goes pow, 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 pow.
You're gonna have to figure out some classes to take this semester.
It goes pow, 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 pow,
PE.
underwater basket. PE, underwater basket, we even got. I am a film student. I am a film student. That has nothing to do. I'm a film student. I don't do PE. Don't do underwater basket. I do film.
He would do you something. I don't get it.
I can say serious or cop out or hard to define.
And Miss Goldstein, that's all I can
You have a sticker. I can't believe this. I worked really hard at what I do.
I'll see you later, Miss Goldstein. Have a nice day.
There's advantages to both. Advantages to both. And me being uptight.
Yeah.
And you being all right. There's advantages to
College counselor. So that was Brittany and a group that I was here with at DOM, upset about their whole college experience, really. There was a million things that we could come up with, really. That was just a very simple one of career counselors who don't really care about anything and just tell you to check the box, and then half the time that you check the box, they're like, oh, that's the wrong box. Sorry. You just got to go spend $10,000 more. Like, I can't believe how many times that's happened to people. So there's this disconnect with, people in education and then the people that they're educating and the reality of actually getting a job. So we just have a few more minutes. I just want to talk a little bit more about how we can make better connections, I guess, going forward with the people that we're encountered with. And, I just mentor students, but I'm constantly asking them, what can you do? What are you doing now? And, what are you going to do? I don't want to scare them, but I don't want them to be in a bubble throughout college. And I feel like that's kind of what it is.
I think that there's so many ways that we could change colleges to make them create connection. Because I think that we need to change colleges away from this thinking of this is a job training facility, that we are here to, the point of going to college is to get a job, because in lots of ways we know that that's not happening. You've seen, especially since the financial collapse, the massive influx of students to schools who are, the market is already saturated with people with degrees. They say the GED or the BA is the new GED, and that that bachelor's, that degree doesn't get you a job anymore like it used to back in the the time when our grandparents and parents were growing up. And I think that in lots of ways we need to see our universities making better connections, our schools making better connections with the communities around them. And we need to be seeing our universities and our higher education institutions as problem-solving infrastructures, where we can use these massive infrastructures and resources, where we can take the knowledge of folks who are there and apply them to situations in our communities, in our nation, in our world, and really drive solutions from these kinds of forward-thinking places, and not just use that to service the market. Yes, we should still have job training through higher education. Yes, we should still be, giving people the space to pursue knowledge for knowledge's sake, especially in the area of scientific advancement. But at the same time, we really need to be thinking differently about the ways that our education systems intersect with the society and the communities that they're in, and how they can be used to improve them. And that requires, in lots of ways, growing a movement that will push for that to happen, because the way that the institutional and economic forces are driving it, it's moving away from that sort of thing.
Marty, any tips that you see high schoolers every day, real world?
Yeah, I think, I mean, from my perspective, working with some high school students as well as working with university students, there's no doubt there's this frustration that has been developing, probably since the late 2000s. This frustration of, is the education that we're getting providing us with the tools to go out and get adequately compensated, fairly compensated for the work that we do. And I think there's evidence where a few people do go out of the university or do get out of high school and get a job that they love that pays well. But overall, I think that's not the case. And I think, my only contribution, I think, here would be, what are those successful role models that we can put on a pedestal and understand, what are you doing as a graduate from high school, or what are you doing as a college graduate to innovatively be a worker or to be employed. And so I do have one graduate student that I've been in contact with who finished a couple years ago, and she said she's a part of this like shared economy where she provides her labor and maybe does a service for someone, and then someone else gives a service to her, and they share the labor, and there's no currency transacted. And I think maybe we're going to be drifting toward those kinds of models so people can sustain themselves and avoid, going back home to living with mom and dad, although that's perfectly fine too. So I think we just have to find out what are those positive role models we can look at, and then also within high school and within the university to force pressure and demand from instructors and demand from teachers that we want education that's practical, and we want some kind of help when we look for a job in terms of job placement and networking and things like that.
I think mentorship is the most important thing, and we all seem to be mentors, which is good. We could all probably do better, care a little bit more. I do. It is sometimes hard to care when you're caring about yourself a little bit, too much. But I think, I just sometimes I worry about futures, even though I should probably be worrying about mine. But I think it really develops everybody when we develop the people who are younger than us. So that's all the time we have. So thank you for all joining me. And this has been a great discussion, and hope to see you again soon. But join us again on Real Ideals. Next month we'll be talking about another issue, health. So we will talk to community members from different parts of the health field. And so we will see you then. Thanks again.